Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Paperback Possibility Podcast. If this is the first episode you're seeing, hello, welcome in. My name is Ashley.
And I'm Alfie.
And we are two people who very much like books.
That is true.
A lot of people in the world. But our podcast is a little bit different. This is a standout episode, but...
Bonus episode.
It's a bonus episode. Usually what we do is Alfie and I take turns to pick two books and the other person chooses which one we're going to read for the next month. This month, Alfie and I are reading Deadly Education, a book by Naomi Novik, I think is her name. Mm-hmm. And we are enjoying... Well, I've just started it. I don't know if you've started it yet.
No.
But in the meantime, Alfie and I went on holiday last week and we decided we wanted to have a beach read.
Because we went to the coast.
Because we went to the coast. And we decided we wanted to have something unserious to read and just relax. And actually, like, for me, after reading The Handmaid's Tale, and that episode is probably up already.
Yeah, but it goes to that. That's a long, heavy... boring book to read. Very good, obviously, and it has lots of academic context, but it was quite dull and not a lot of fun. The
Handmaid's Tale is something that I have wanted to read for ages. We decided we couldn't because, well, I DNF'd it. I didn't finish it because I couldn't do it. But Alfie slogged through. We've got that podcast up now, so you can go and watch that or listen to it if you're on Spotify or YouTube. Let us know what you think of that in the comments of that podcast as well. But at the end of that podcast, we teased what we were going to do for this little mini episode. Mm-hmm. We decided we were going to read a book for a beach. We walked into The Works, which is a UK chain store, which does a lot of like stationery equipment, books, just a lot of like everything and nothing. Like, it's one of my favourite places to go.
It's a great shop.
And one of the books that was on the shelf was a book called Beach Read by Emily Henry. And we literally...
Perfect.
...knew that we wanted to read a beach read. We were calling it a beach read. And then there was a book that was literally called Beach Read.
Yeah.
So we thought, do you know what, that's perfect. I read the blurb and fell in love with the idea of it immediately. So we bought it on Kindle. We both read it. And we're here. Before we get into it, I'm going to read you the blurb. January is a hopeless romantic who narrates her life like she's the lead in a blockbuster movie. Gus is a serious literary type who thinks true love is a fairy tale. But January and Gus have more in common than you think. They're both broke, they've got crippling writer's block, and they both need to write bestsellers before the summer ends. The result? A bet to swap genres and see who gets published first. The risk? In telling each other stories, their worlds might change entirely. Set over one sizzling summer, Beach Read is a witty love story that will make you laugh a lot, cry a little, and fall head over heels. I liked it.
So did I.
I have so much to say about this book. The podcast, usually what we do is we split it into two halves. Mm-hmm. We've got the first half, which is where we sort of loosely describe the book, and then the second half we go into spoiler territory. Mm-hmm. I think for this one, what we're going to do is we're just going to talk about the book openly throughout the whole podcast.
Yeah, we're doing spoilers.
I think we can just talk spoilers because this is a book where if you haven't read it, it takes about 3 to 5 hours to read if you're like relatively quick.
Yeah, it's quite short.
It's not like the longest book in the world.
It was like 300 pages.
363 pages. But it's not like a hard 363 pages. No. It's very easy to read. It's just good. I like contemporary romance anyway. You aren't a fan.
It's not that I'm not a fan. I have nothing against it. It's just not for me. Just generally, I just find these stories to be... They don't have the thing that I'm looking for.
Yeah, but you always want like something big and something like...
I like something big or something dark.
Yeah.
That's usually what I'm after. But yeah.
If we go into content warnings for this book, there's a lot of death.
Yeah. Which I liked.
There's a lot of familial relationships being discussed. There is a grumpy sunshine romance, which isn't really a content warning, but it's a theme.
Grumpy sunshine.
Yeah,
I don't know what that is.
So there's loads of different tropes for books, especially books that have like a romance through the core. Yeah. So for instance, like age gap romance.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Grumpy sunshine describes the relationship
because of the two characters. Yes, got it.
Gus and January.
Oh, it's a whole world I didn't know about.
There's a lot of alcohol mentioned. There's cults mentioned. which is strange.
That was my favourite part of the book. I was like, I want to know about this.
Yeah. And I think that's about it for content warnings.
Yeah.
I do apologise if I've missed anything. The book basically starts with our main character, January, turning up at her new house.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it her new house? Because she found out that throughout her whole perfect childhood, her parents were so in love from the beginning. They just are the dream couple. Her mum gets diagnosed with cancer. That's another content warning.
That's another content warning right there.
Her mum gets diagnosed with cancer twice in her life. She goes through it. She gets past it. Then she gets hit by it again. January didn't realise until after the beginning of the sort of book that her dad actually cheated on her mum during one of her cancer.
Yeah, I think the implication is he did it through both.
Is it?
I think from what I remember, so I finished the book last night. You finished it yesterday
afternoon.
Yeah, yesterday afternoon. So it's still fresh. From what I got was that when it got difficult,
he'd go. Right.
And that was how he responded to her diagnosis. And I think a lot of the book is January trying to come to terms with the fact that he would do something like that. When her mum needed him the most, he would leave. But she also kind of, because she loved him, January's mother, she didn't like it, but she kind of understood why that was happening. So that was a whole interesting. That's like the whole reason it's there. And then January arrives at this house, and it's the house that her dad had owned, I assume. So like how much money this guy has.
He did. He bought it.
Yeah, he owned this house and basically lived there during his
affair.
Yeah, his various escapades with this woman. It wasn't
that he was cheating with multiple women. He was cheating with one singular woman.
Yeah.
Her name is Sonia. She is a big theme throughout the book. She is always sort of there, always sort of not there, but she still lives in this town that January has moved into this house of.
Yeah.
She's moved into the house because she doesn't have anywhere to live, because she is a broke author, and she doesn't have to pay rent on the house because it's already owned. She needs to go through this house and sell all the furniture to eventually sell the house as well, so that she can get rid of that from their assets, I suppose.
Yeah.
And when she moves in next to this really grumpy neighbour, who we don't know at the time, but he's celebrating his birthday. He is like everything she hates. He is miserable, he is grumpy, he's just not a nice person
He's a pessimist,
he's pessimistic,
cynic, classic, all of the tropes. And we get this basically from her first and sort of second interaction with him. Yeah.
Before she realises that this guy that she has moved next to just so happens to be her sort of high school rival.
Yes, yeah.
So when she was back at high school, she has always been interested in writing. They're both writers. And Gus, who is the neighbour, spoiler alert, the neighbour, he was really into like sort of more serious, dark, deep books. Yeah. Really like a dark mirrored reflection of him. He has a lot of trauma from growing up, so I suppose that is reflected in his writing.
Yes.
January was always more into sort of like romance and like lighter hearted books, sort of like the rom-com kind of feels, like how this book is written.
Yeah.
And she always sort of idolized Gus growing up, a little bit jealous.
Yeah.
A little bit like, I wish I was doing that.
Yeah.
And Gus didn't seem to pay attention to January at all. We have no indication at this point that he even knew who she was. But she works out, as we get into the book, that the neighbour who she's met in shadowy situations is Gus from her high school, and they're reunited. And he picks up the fact that she is January. But he knew that pretty much.
He knew that, but he doesn't let on that he knows that straight away.
Yeah.
And he kind of plays it off like he doesn't recognise her, he doesn't know who he is. Who she is, sorry, and she's kind of going through like, does he remember me? And then she kind of goes into this whole like, why doesn't he remember me? That's so insulting. And there's a lot of throughout the book, there's a lot of one of the aspects that I didn't like about January's character. There's a lot of like, why doesn't he like me? Why doesn't he notice me? Why doesn't he remember me? And the other thing that I didn't like about Gus's character is that he did, but he purposefully makes her feel that way
Yeah.
for no other reason than to be kind of above her, and that comes through with what they write as well. And Gus kind of refers to what she writes as kind of like schlocky nothing fiction, and he's like, but what I write is like proper like fiction that people will want to read, and it all comes across as a bit like, why you gotta be like that, man? You know,
he's got this sort of sanctimonious air.
He does,
thinks he's better than everyone, but this book has its flaws.
Yeah, it does.
It has its pluses. I really liked this book. I could definitely see myself picking it up and reading it again. I don't think you will pick it up and read it again.
No.
But for me, I thought it was just a perfect sort of like wrapped up love story. I really like standalone books as well, so this immediately has like a massive plus. I say I really like standalone books. There is a book I'm looking forward to coming out in August that's second in a series that I started reading last year, which I'm very excited for. If you want us to do a podcast based on like the books we're currently reading and the books we're looking forward to, by the way, please let us know, because I would love to do that.
Because we both read outside of this podcast.
We do.
Like what's being talked about here.
We do. One thing I will say, I will 100% pick up more Emily Henry books.
Yeah.
It was so good. One thing that did take me off guard is when you read like contemporary romance.
Yeah.
It's always really funny how you have your love story, that is the focus, and then you have all of the different other stories that are happening alongside it.
Yeah, sure.
So you've got the love story, you've got Gus's family. I think that all sort of like ties into one. Then you sort of have the underlying Sonia and her dad who are having this affair,
yes,
and learning more about that and whether, you know, cheating on someone makes you like a terrible person or whether or not it was sort of justified, which is very much left up to the reader.
It is. You get to decide what you think about that.
And then you have this bet that's happening. So when January and Gus finally realise who they are, they basically make a bet with each other. Gus says, I think you could never write fiction like I do, like serious, sort of darker fiction.
Yeah.
And January says, well, you could never write a rom-com, romance, lovey, floofy book. And he's like, yes, I can. And she's like, yes, I can. Let's make a bet.
Yeah.
So they sit down and they make a bet about it. And one of the things that they do to sort of like outline how they are going to keep on top of this bet.
Yeah, to keep each other moving through it.
Yes. Is they have date nights every week. They're not date nights.
They don't start
but
as
they
date
are
nights.
date nights.
But they don't start as date nights, but I would say they become date nights almost immediately.
Yeah.
That's the one thing. Just to pause as a side note whilst we're talking on this specific thing, I very much felt like there wasn't really any build up. They hated each other, and then literally before the end of the first date night, they're both like holding hands and they're like touching each other, and it's like, well, this has gone from 0 to 100 like that. And I get that there's like they had a lot of chemistry, there's a lot of like banter, and like they clearly are attracted to each other, so maybe that's fine. But for someone who doesn't read romance, they seem to be like at each other's throats, and they walk into a restaurant and they're like all over each other, and that's kind of that, and that's the end of that. So, and then it's just going from there. I don't know if that's how it's supposed to work, but
I think every romance book works differently. As someone who likes reading romance books but doesn't do it very often, my like favorite thing is like when you have the tension is so much and you can't like imagine not touching that person. Like it's so strong and you can like read the chemistry like right off the page. Like you're almost in it, you can feel it.
Yeah.
And I feel like those for me are some of the best stories, which I guess is why I liked this one so much.
Yeah.
Because you're right, it was like straight into the romance. They didn't really have any like sort of getting to know each other.
There wasn't any kind of like crest of how this is working. It's just like we're at each other's throats, we don't like each other, but now we're all over each other.
Yeah.
And
I liked.
And I just felt like it just came across as a bit like, oh, like I knew this was where it was going. I guess I wanted to see some like drama of how we're gonna get there, but we're just like we're here and then we're there, and that happens within the space of about 4 pages. And then it's more the drama of what happens after that.
Yeah.
And that's good. I liked all that stuff. But that I remember reading it and being like, oh, we're already here already.
So they do get to know each other throughout the course of the book. It's not like they just jump each other. And to be fair, we don't get any spice until about 70% of the way through.
Yeah.
And there is spice.
Oh, there is spice.
There is spice.
Goodness me, it is spicy.
It's not as spicy as a spicy book.
No, it's very clean, I would say, and classy. It's not like, it's not smutty, but it's very classy and very sensitive. But good lord, she goes for it.
This is like your first experience reading a romance, because you've read like Game of Thrones where there is spice.
Yeah, I've read books that have romance in it, but never like that's the main focus of what's going on.
There's so much to talk about in this book. There is so much, and also nothing, because it is very much like a pocket of like a scoopy pocket. Firstly, I wanted to film this podcast on the beach. Yes. Neither of us finished it in time.
No.
But also, it was rainy and windy the whole week we were there.
There was no way we could have filmed it on the beach.
Like, even if we had all of the equipment and everything set up, it just wouldn't have happened.
A very windy episode. One
of the storylines, apart from Sonia and the dad that run through the book, is the cult.
Yeah, this is my favourite bit.
So the date nights sort of divulge into, well, also we need to go and find, out more for our books. We need to do some research. And Gus's books are very heavily research focused.
Yeah, they're very based in reality, dark situations that have happened in reality, which he then creates a fictional work out of. Mm-hmm. And so he's researching this cult that was really horrible to its members. Horrible things were happening there. And he's going to write a book about a horrible cult. Not about this cult, but he just wants to know what that's like in real life, so then he can write like an adequate portrayal of that in a fictional setting. And so he takes January to meet people from this cult. And the whole way, whenever this bit of the book started, my like eyes like opened up and I was like, oh yeah, this is, because that's the kind of thing that I like to read. But I found all of that stuff quite interesting, and it's actually like really well done. Like the interviews that they talk about when they talk about this cult, those are like straight out of a very different kind of book. And I think it's really well done how Emily Henry she very much represents the kind of fiction that Gus would write, and she represents it very, very well. And I thought that added a level of validity to what was going on between January and Gus. I nearly said Emily and Gus, which is probably a Freudian slip. But she definitely, as an author, she clearly respects that other brand of fiction, and I like how she's basically saying like that's just as valid.
Yeah.
But also I can do that too. And there's a little bit, I imagine there's a little bit of self-insert going on there as well. But it's really well done, and it's really interesting. This, I can't remember what they're called, like the New World Cult,
New Eden
Cult, or something like that. And it's all like really terrible. Like the members are only allowed to do certain things. They're not allowed to leave the religion. They're very controlled. We basically talk mostly to this like one family, like a mother and her son, and the son has a much harsher and worse memory of it than the mum does. The mum kind of just accepts it as like, well, we just kind of did what we needed to do because we didn't have any money, and these people took us in. Whereas the son views it as like they wouldn't let us leave, we couldn't do anything, and all this stuff. And it comes across as really, really dark. And there's this really great moment when January kind of very much takes that all on board, and she listens to them, and she really like takes all that in, and she kind of thinks about how Gus must feel writing about all this stuff. And that then kind of leads us on to why Gus writes all this stuff and the past that he has. And Gus's past is basically that he was abused as a child quite badly by his father. And then much more recently, and this is definitely a spoiler, he was in a marriage where his wife left him for his best man at his wedding, and that just destroyed him. Like, he was so ready to like give it a go despite his childhood trauma, and then he was betrayed, and it's very much like well, that's just it, I'm just not doing it anymore. And you can definitely understand then why Gus is like how he is. Again, which I really loved. Like, the characterization of both these characters is really good. I actually really liked Gus as a character. He's obviously a bit of a bad bloke, particularly at the start, and he has like moments throughout the book where he makes like the wrong decision. He's kind of a knobhead, but but at the same time, he kind of comes good. Like he has goodness in him. He just needs the opportunity to have that, to share it with someone who recognizes that part of him. And there's a really great line that January recognizes after he goes through all this with her, and she says, "Nobody ever chose Gus. Like nobody ever gave Gus a go. He was always either beaten up by his dad, and his wife left him. Like nobody's ever just loved him for him." And I thought that was really good. I really liked that character arc for him.
I think that the characters were both really frustrating at times and quite annoying. And I really liked that because I think it added so much character.
Yeah.
And I think both of these people are very believable characters as
100%.
well. I don't think that they're caricatures or anything like that. I think they are slightly stereotyped, but in the way that all humans in certain job roles are stereotyped. Like a romance writer being like January makes sense.
Yes, yeah, of course, yeah.
And like Gus being the sort of like hardened fiction writer.
And his hair's messy, and he's all like, "Oh God, the world is so bad. I can't quit smoking, and all I drink is black coffee," and it's all that kind of thing.
Does it sound familiar?
Yeah. But that's how he is.
Yeah.
And he's believable as that person.
Yeah.
He doesn't come across as like a painting. He comes across like a real. And January's the same.
I think they both have like very severe flaws. We were talking about this morning. For instance, Gus is like so ready to give up.
Yeah.
Like all the time. He's so scared of commitment. And to be fair, it does make sense after his wife left him and his childhood never really had that sort of solidity that you want. But every time he and January get a little bit closer, he runs.
He pulls away, yeah.
And I don't love that. But also, January is so apathetic.
She is.
She just goes, you know what? That's fine. He wants to do his thing. He can do this, which I do think is fair. But also, like, this is a really sort of like deep romance story in a lot of ways. And why are you not fighting for him? Like, you really like him. You love him. You're borderline like you love him from like the start.
Absolutely. And building on that, she just kind of lets a lot of what happens in the story just happen to her. She doesn't really push out any kind of like, no, I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to do this. She just kind of lets Gus kind of do what he wants with her because she loves him. And then ultimately just kind of hopes that her love for him will just kind of make him better.
Yeah. Which
it does. But at the same time, reading that, I was a bit like, I don't love that. Mm-hmm. I don't think it sends quite the right message. I think it portrays January as quite a meek person and a bit of a walkover, and she's just kind of waiting for. And she even talks about that. She literally refers to herself as a rabbit, and he's like a predator, and so she can't do anything. She's just completely at his mercy. Which I'm sure has elements of when I think about romance, right? So I like a lot of romance that I hear about is only about like what people on the internet say is wrong with romance today, and it's the Twilight thing. It's the little kind of meek woman meets this like strong, mysterious, dark man and just kind of lets him like run all over her until her love for him kind of fixes him. And I did get a little bit from this book. I didn't love that. I was hoping for a bit more from January, a bit more fight, a bit more like, no, I'm taking control of this situation, and I'm telling you, Gus, that you're being you're not. It's not right what you're doing. We only really get one scene of that, and his explanation is given, and she's like, okay, all is forgiven, which I don't love. Again, I think she should then hold him to a bit of a higher standard and be like, no, you treated me really badly. Like, I understand why you did it. You still treated me really badly, and that's just not on. But we don't get any of that.
There's something to be said for just letting people just do their own thing. Like, you can definitely read it as she's not like letting him walk all over her. She's just letting it happen. Like for me personally, I used to fight like so much for things, and now I'm older. I'm like, do you know what? If they don't want to be in my life, I don't care. Like,
Yeah.
they can go and live their... I mean, I do care,
Yeah.
but I can't control how someone else is feeling. And you can read it like that, instead of it being he's walking all over her. However, it is definitely a trope in romance that it is like the Twilight thing, and so the lion fell in love with the lamb. Like, it's very... What you see is a very strong masculine character, and then a very... not a weak feminine character, but like the woman in the relationship is always a bit like at the mercy of the man.
At the whims of, yeah.
And that's not necessarily the best thing. I think when you're reading books like this, I don't want to call it like non-serious fiction, because I think all fiction is quite serious.
Absolutely.
And this just being more of a light-hearted book, I feel like I can make a bit more of an excuse for that. Whether that's right or not, I don't know.
That is right.
But to your point about her just sort of like letting it all walk over her, one of the themes throughout the book is that January sort of sees herself as the main character in her story, but she doesn't give main character energy.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, that's massive.
She is definitely, like, as you say, things happen to her. She doesn't really make things happen.
No.
And one of the things that really annoys me about January, and this is based on completely my own personal views, when she goes into this house, she's going in armed with a letter from her dad.
Yeah.
Her dad has passed away, by the way.
That's kind of the inciting incident, as they say in literature studies.
She is in this house, her dad's affair house, because her dad has passed away. And it was like mysteriously, but not really, he just suddenly passed away in his sleep.
Yeah.
And
it's not really important, like, how that happened.
No. And it sort of like left this legacy of like, what?
Yeah, the question,
who is this
man? Who was my father?
Not really like seriously talked about throughout the book, because it's not really the main focal point.
No.
But at the funeral, Sonia, the affair partner, comes in and hands January a letter and just like, please read this. This is, your dad left this for you. And January's like, nah. And basically keeps the letter away. And she doesn't open it until very, 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 very late in the book. Penultimate chapter, maybe? Something like that.
Yeah, penny ultimate chapter. Is that what they call it?
Penultimate.
Yeah, no, the one before the penultimate chapter.
Oh.
The penultimate chapter. Well, if you count the epilogue. Yeah, if you count the epilogue as its own chapter.
I don't know. But yeah, so she has this letter, and this whole time she just doesn't open it. And that really annoys me, because I feel like I do understand it. My dad has also passed away when he was quite young, and we could never talk to him again. Like, so I, firstly, not knowing that the dad dying was a theme of this book, I was like, oh, okay, well, that's now happening. But also, I do have some kind of understanding of why she wouldn't want to open it, but especially because this is the last thing that she's ever going to hear from her dad. However, I wanted her to open it so badly, so early.
Yeah.
And obviously that wasn't happening. And that's her decision. Also, Sonia keeps trying to get in contact with her throughout this whole book, and she's just shutting it down. January's like, no, affair partner, bad, the whole time. And I think what annoys me most about this, for instance, at one point, she emails Sonia to be like, what do you want done with the furniture on the porch?
Yeah.
And she gets a reply from Sonia, and she stops reading it halfway through, and there's literally like a hyphenated gap where she just stops. It's like, give her, like, at least read it. You don't have to reply, but at least read the email. And then I'm sat there as a reader, like, I don't know what side we're supposed to be on, but at this point, and I don't know whether it's me reading through it or whether this is what Emily Henry's doing, but I wasn't getting Sonia's a bad guy throughout the whole book.
No, she didn't put out that energy at all. But I think it was more that I'm getting a lot from January that this is all your fault.
Yeah, she wants to put the blame on something.
Yeah, and she's something terrible's happened to her, and it's happened to her in a way that's really horrible. Like, she's not only lost her father, she's also learned that her father that she had was never actually that man in the first place. So she doesn't know who that is. And she does talk about, like you mentioned just there quite a lot, where she's just like, but now I can't talk to him about it.
Yeah.
Like, I can't ask him about anything. And there's this part towards the beginning of the book where she says, I'm so angry about that, because all of this stuff that I now know about him, I can't ask him about it,
Yeah.
and that's not fair. Like, how dare he leave me with all of this stuff that now I just don't understand? And she's got all that anger, so she just thrusts it on Sonia, and which is unfair. But I think it then adds to the believability. I think that's quite a human reaction to have.
Yeah, absolutely.
And but the problem is, like, there's that little element of narrativeness where it's a bit like, if you just open the letter, everything would be fine.
Yeah. Like, it's there and it's not open for a reason.
Yeah.
And I fully agree with Emily Henry leaving that to the last minute. But
It is, you as a reader, you know that. You know, just as a person, as that fourth wall, just knowing how fiction works, you know, reading it, if you just open that letter, January, everything's going to be fine. And it makes it a little bit difficult to not just get frustrated whenever it comes to a situation where the letter's in talk and she's like, well, I'm not going to open it. It's just like, oh, for God's sake, just open it.
yeah, literally. I think for you, and tell me if I'm wrong, I think that there's a lot of the underlying storyline was more interesting to you than Gus and January romance.
Yeah, the cult thing.
Everything aside from
everything aside from the actual romance, I found more interesting. I really found Gus's character arc to be quite interesting, and how he recovered from 2 traumatic events which are linked together in his self-worth, and how he kind of gets past that. I found the cult subplot that was kind of like a sort of like Watchmen comic book thing going on that I really liked. That was just like completely not attached to the story at all, but has like similar themes that kind of fall back into the story of familial relationships that go through this book. And yeah, that's about it. That's kind of the parts of the book that I found the most interesting. I found January's character to be too meek to be really interesting, because she never does anything. And I really despair for her as a character, because everything just happens to her. She never does anything about it. It's not until the very end of the book, when she actually opens the letter, that it's like, I'm actually doing something about this now. But even then, she's doing something about it only to then find that her problems are now solved because of what her dad put in the letter. So again, it's another thing that's just happening to her that's kind of sorting her life out. So yeah, she lacked like a level of agency that I just found her to be quite a bit nothing, unfortunately. But still, she's believable enough as a human being that I didn't write her off completely.
So many people don't have agency.
Yeah.
So many people let things happen to them. And I think that doesn't take away from her being like a real character.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do think I really loved it when she and Gus really started writing.
Yeah.
Because there was all these like research trips, aka dates, and it just got more and more like deep in that. And then all of a sudden she's like, I need to write this book.
Yeah.
And she sat down and she starts drawing on all of these personal experiences of herself and puts them into this book. And Gus is doing the same thing. Actually, Gus's book, we got a little bit of a snippet of how it ended at the end.
I have no memory of that.
Oh my gosh, it was so good though.
What was it?
It was like my favorite ending of like anything. And it's so he writes this cult book. This is like a spoiler if you don't want to know how like his book in the book ends, but I'm sure if you're reading this far and listening to this far into the...
Yeah.
But he writes his book about cults.
Yeah.
And he has his main character whose name is Travis, and Travis and Doris, his partner, managed to escape the cult.
Yes, yeah, I remember that.
They're driving down the highway, and then the last thing they see is this meteor that the prophet predicted coming towards them.
Yes, I do remember that.
And hitting the earth.
Yeah.
And it's not that he saw the meteor, it's that he swerved and then swerved back into the road, as in like, because he was so taken aback by it, that he ended up, they died in a car crash at the end. And that was like sort of Gus's happy ending. Because
it's that kind of ironic.
They got out, he was happy, the last thing they saw was arguably beautiful, like this massive comet.
And then they died.
And that's how I like my books to end. But that's,
Death.
again, like, I love standalone films and novels that sort of, like, have no, like, for instance, Rogue One, the Star Wars story.
Great. Best one.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
So good. Best Star Wars. And please don't argue with me on this, because I cannot, like, this is all opinion.
And we also don't care. If the Star Wars fan base comes after us, we don't care. We like that one.
That's it. We'll just take that one.
Yeah.
You can have the others.
You can have the others, fine. We're not in that fandom, it's okay.
It's okay. But yeah, so like Rogue One, I would give you loads more, but I don't want to spoil anything. But all of my favourite stories end up with like something like that.
Yeah.
So that was just like an added little bonus. A couple of things. I want to read you 2 things I highlighted.
Oh yeah.
I like to highlight quotes when I read my books.
This is one of my favourite parts of the podcast.
I didn't have any for the last couple books. So running through the story, January was in a very serious relationship for 6 or 7 years with a man named Jacques, and that was what were you were calling him, like, Jacques? In your head.
In my head, I'm like Jacques, Jacques.
Jacques. So Jacques is his, like, the dream golden man, but he's not. He's a bit of a wet wipe, to be honest, and he's not very nice. So after some reflection, January says, "He fits so perfectly into the love story I'd imagined for myself that I mistook him for the love of my life." And I just thought, that's the most perfect...
That is very good, yeah.
That's so... Emily Henry, a lot of this writing is incredibly good, by the way. I don't know if you would agree with me, but for me, I just think it's so simple and so perfect. And she's got these little nuggets of just
wisdom,
beauty and wisdom.
Yeah.
So I really, really liked that a lot. I thought that was really, like, nice. And as someone who's put myself in that position before as well, I just related really hard to that.
Yeah.
The other one is near the end of the book, and it's when, throughout the whole story, January has a best friend called Shadi, or Shady. I pronounce it Shadi.
Yes.
She is always on the phone. She's never there. And at the end of the book, she ends up coming and visiting in January. And she says they're having this conversation about falling in love. January was in love with Jacques, or Jacques.
Yes.
Or Jacques.
Jacques.
And she never fell in love with him.
Yeah. I liked that. Yeah, I did like that, yeah.
And so January asks, so falling's the part that hurts? And if you wind up in love without it hurting, then there's no falling. And Shadi says, no. Falling's the part that takes your breath away. It's the part where you can't believe the person standing in front of you both exists and happen to wander into your path. It's supposed to make you feel lucky to be alive exactly when and where you are. And it's just like, it's just those moments that just make it such a good read. And like, there's so many moments like that in this book where I just feel so heard.
Yeah.
And like, I think that's maybe the reason why I like romance so much in this genre, because it's not, you know, unrelatable. It's not set in the past. It's not set in the future. It's not like dystopian. I love dystopian fiction, but it's not dystopian. It's just like anyone could be in this situation, realistically. My favourite thing about this book, and every book that I read that I end up really liking, is I had a few tears at the end, I can't lie. I was doing a little bit of a little sob. And when you finish a book and you're sat there and all you want to do is just sit there in that moment, like you don't want it to quite end, and there's just this bubble of just powerful story that has just captured you for as long as you've been reading, and you just don't want to leave that moment quite yet.
Yeah.
And you just sit in it, and there's this sort of silent bubble. And if you know what I'm talking about, then I had that with this book, and I really liked that. And when I was getting to the end, I was getting sadder and sadder that it was going to be over, because I was just enjoying that world so much. And again, it's not high stakes. It's not like...
It's incredibly low stakes.
It's really, really low stakes. And it's not something I do not want a sequel. But
no.
I love it. And I love the vibe. And I just think it was a really nice experience. For me, realistically, you're going to disagree with me, but for me, this was a 5-star read.
Wow, okay.
I don't think it was, like, groundbreaking. I think that there were so many flaws in, like, the characters. But for me, and sitting with that way after, I enjoyed it so much, and I have to say I do sort of rate it separately to like other books like Stranded. I don't think I gave a 5 stars to Stranded. I can't remember.
We didn't podcast that one.
We didn't podcast it. No, Stranded by Sarah Goodwin was my favorite book read of last year, and I really loved that. But I don't know if I gave that 5 stars. I just felt like it was just so cozy and heartwarming, and I think that genre of book, I find it really difficult to not give a 5 star to.
I am not going to give it 5 stars. I'm going to give it 4 stars because of January's character. But I do completely see what you're saying. I think as a romance read, this is a very good romance read. It's very heartfelt, like the pearls of wisdom that come through it, the subplots and the subtext, and the secondary plot of the cult thing and the books they're writing is all super interesting.
Yeah.
The actual romance of it was the least interesting part of the book for me, but that's more of a personal taste thing, I think, than an actual quality thing. But I can see the value in this 100%, despite that it's not to my taste. 100% I can see the value in this, and I can absolutely understand why someone like you who loves this particular brand of fiction can get so much out of it.
Yeah.
And as a reader, just as a reader in general, it's always nice to read outside of your own personal taste, and I'm really glad that I read this book. I didn't when I got to the end, I wasn't thinking I don't want it to end. I was like,
I'm done
now. I want to get back to what I like to read. But I am glad I read it, and I would, if someone said to me, can you just recommend me like an easy romance? I'd be like, Beach Read. Just go buy Beach Read. Easy, really good, great nuggets of wisdom, good characters, great subplots. You'll have a great time. I did have a great time.
Yeah, it's a book that I wouldn't necessarily recommend to people. If someone says, what's a brilliant book that you've read? I've given it a 5 star, but I wouldn't go, read Beach Read.
Yeah.
I'd say, like, one of the other books that we've read.
Yeah.
But for instance, my friend Mike, who listens to the podcast, hello Mike.
Hello Mike.
Very big fan of reading.
Yeah.
But this is never a book that I'd say to Mike, go read. I think
Read.
you'd enjoy it, Mike, but I don't think it's something that you would like go out of your way for.
If you're looking for a recommendation, this wouldn't be it.
Yeah, this isn't it. But it's so good, and if you are a romance reader and if you do enjoy that, please read this book. It's so nice, and I will check in with you at some point because I'm going to read more Emily Henry books.
Yeah, do.
There's
even 3 of them I can see here.
Exactly, and even if it's just like a carbon copy of this with a different skin, I'm quite happy with that. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the thing with romance books as well. It's nice like this when there is something a bit different, like the cult thing. There's like, I have never read a romance book like this, but all of the core things and the structures are the same as every other romance book I've read. Ticking all the boxes. So yeah, ticking all the boxes, but that's so important with this genre.
Any genre fiction, I would say, you have to tick the boxes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Horror fiction, which is my thing, like, you have to tick all the boxes. Yeah. If you don't tick all the boxes, I'm out.
Yeah, absolutely.
And same with romance or like fantasy or comedy or anything like that. You have to tick all the boxes. And I've always said, like, if you get your fundamentals right in anything, the thing that you make will be built on a solid enough foundation that it will be good.
Yeah.
And it might not be incredible. It might not blow the doors off of anything. But if you've got all your fundamentals there and they're correct and they're good, the thing that you've made is a good quality product, and that's what this book is. It is just a good quality romance novel, and I had a great time with it.
Yeah,
I won't read anything by her again unless we do it for the podcast.
Yeah,
but I'm never going to say, that was a bad book, because it wasn't. It was great. I actually really liked it.
I'm really glad.
Yeah, I did.
I'm really glad to hear that.
Yeah. I'm not going to read it again, but I did like it.
Thank you so much for listening to our podcast or watching it if you're watching on YouTube as well. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us for this little strange bonus episode. It's so weird that we're not going to be
picking a book now. I thought that when we just started recording. I was like, whose go is it? Oh, wait. We're not actually doing that this time.
I think this is such a lighter read and something that I definitely needed myself before I went on to the next book, which, as we said, was...
Deadly Education, thank you.
Which is, for some reason,
Dark
really
wizards
hard.
In a school.
To get into my head. That's coming out on the 22nd of May, so stay tuned for that if you haven't already. Make sure you follow along with the podcast. If you did enjoy it, please rate it 5 stars. And also, if you're watching on YouTube, please give a like. Make sure you comment down below. It really helps us out.
Share us with your friends.
Absolutely. We don't do too much marketing. It's just...
We do this because we like doing this. Yeah.
So if you do want to help push the podcast out, please do. That would be so wonderful. But... please stay safe. Please be well. Let us know if you do read this book as well. You can find me everywhere at Ashleigh Amelia, and you can find Alfie everywhere at
Lanky Crisp.
Is it just Lanky Crisp?
It's Lanky Crisp. Lankey. Keey? Lankey Crisp.
Like,
and that's me
food.
Everywhere. Yeah.
So please come and check us out. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you so much for listening to us waffle for 47 minutes. It's been absolutely wonderful. And I've really enjoyed this experience and this book.
Yeah, me too.
I'm Ashleigh.
I'm Alfie.
And we will catch you in the next podcast. Bye.
Bye.